we have Liz Becker and Don O'Toole, both from Beaufort, and they were involved in I'll say, a peaceful protest, as a matter of fact. Liz, you even described it as such.
Yes.
2 weeks ago now?
It was April the 5th.
I'm sorry, let me do that really.
Yeah, April the 5th.
April 5th, yeah. And that, of course, the hands-off protest at the Beaufort Courthouse Square in Beaufort. And let's talk about that. The event, what precipitated that, and what you were hoping to get out of it. It was impressive. Somewhere between, and there's arguable numbers, but 500 to 1,000 people were in attendance. You said you had, because you were involved in the registration of it?
Yeah, the registration on Mobilize, which is an online app, had 500 applicants. But I know that there were many more than that, because I don't think anybody from Beaufort signed up, and there were a lot of Beaufort people there.
Oh, really?
So it was very
well
there's
no reason to sign up if you're in Beaufort. You
exactly.
Just
you just show up.
Yeah,
right.
You just show up.
Exactly.
All right. And Don, what was your role in that? Don O'Toole.
So I've known Liz now for about a year and a half. We've been very active in local politics, and as part of the work that we've done, we are actually working to be part of the slate of candidates that in the future would run the Carteret County Democratic Party.
Okay.
And through that work, we talk every day. We have a meeting every Friday at Crew at 1:30. Through that work, Liz had mentioned that she was going to organize a hands-off rally.
And by the way, there were over 1,300 hands-off rallies across the country.
Correct.
You got it right. I brought that to statistic, and you already had it.
Yeah, 1,300, and I think you had maybe 5 in North Carolina. I know there was one in Raleigh, one in Greenville, one in Charlotte.
Right.
Here, and I'm not sure if there was.
Well, there were a total of, according to what I've read, 3 to 5 million protesters all over the country.
Yeah.
And then also other countries like Germany and Canada joined in as well with their hands off.
And I want to get into the hands off what here in just a moment.
Sure.
But
so Liz single-handedly, unrelated to any political party, Liz decided that she wanted to have a hands-off rally in Carteret County.
Okay.
And so all kudos to Liz Becker for organizing that. She reached out to people she knew in the community that had various interests, looking for speakers. I had volunteered to be a speaker, but then a neighbor of mine, a veteran, a Vietnam veteran, he was interested in writing something, but he wasn't sure he wanted to speak. And so Liz said, well, if Mr. Terrell writes a statement, would someone be willing to read it? And I quickly said that I would be willing to do it. So that's how I got involved.
And I introduced you both without any kind of background, but let me start with you, Liz.
Yes.
Background. Where are you from originally? What's your background?
I'm from Durham. I was born in Charlotte, but I was in Durham all my life, basically. My background is in education, psychology and early childhood education. And I was in the state of North Carolina in public schools for 30 years, and then also spent some time with the Department of Health and Human Services with their students there who are institutionalized or in residential settings because of emotional behavioral issues. But my background is education.
So she feels very comfortable with me. But anyhow, all right, Don,
sure.
Your background.
And so I'm one of those Yankees that learned that North Carolina is a far better place to live.
Right.
I grew up in New York.
Speaking of which, I've got to bring this up. Rich state, poor state, which ranks states based on tax penalty. Pardon me, tax. The weight of taxes. Tax challenges, all sorts of calculations or formula, has ranked North Carolina number 4 in the country, behind Utah. Utah, Illinois 2, I think. Tennessee is 3, and we're number 4 in the country. Apparently Utah has been number 1 in the country for going on 17 years. We've got to figure out what they're doing right in Utah. But that's another story. All right. So, yes, North Carolina is a great place to be.
So literally the day I graduated from college, I moved to North Carolina. That was in 1982. I feel like I should have been born in North Carolina. I love the state. And my first professional career was as civil engineer for the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Had the good fortune to work on a number of big projects in this area. I worked in
the Beverly Purdue Memorial Bridge.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact,
So the big in Craven
Yeah.
County, the Neuse River Bridge. I designed the foundations for that. But I also worked on the Broad and Gales Creek bridges when those were back in the 1990s. And then I also worked on the bridge to Cedar Island. We called it the Thoroughfare Bay Bridge.
Yeah,
So-
you're getting pretty close to being local, but continue on.
So I was a civil engineer, and incredibly, while I was working on the New Bern Bridge, there was a lot of contention between DOT and the contractor. And I was, at a lot of the meetings, I was the point person because I had written some of the contractual language that was at issue. And one day I was driving home from New Bern, and I thought, I sort of like this arguing about the contract stuff. So I wound up applying to law school and went to UNC Law School. And then I was an attorney for the next 25 years of my life. Finished my career as the senior deputy city attorney for the city of Durham.
Okay.
But my wife and I have, for 24 years, owned a home in Carteret County and always knew that this is where we wanted to be someday. So we're glad we made it.
All right. We're talking, again, that was Don O'Toole and Liz Becker with us this afternoon. We're talking about the hands-off protest. Let's talk about hands-off what, Liz?
Okay. Well, one thing I wanted to say, I know that you had just talked about us being number 4 in, what was it, tax?
Tax burden, other regulations, things of that nature.
Because the other thing, because I was an educator, we're like number 49th or 48th in the country with what we pay for our students and teachers. So I just want to put that out there.
I will agree with you on that. However, I don't know that the level of pay is indicative of the results. I would argue quickly that North Carolina students do exceptionally well academically in spite of that calculation of being in the last quartile of teacher pay in the country. I understand that. But we do an exceptional job. And I've got to make
that's
one...
debatable, but we won't get into that right now.
I think it'd be good.
Let's get back into hands-off.
The other thing I do want to
hands-off education spending for children with disabilities.
But there's one other good point. There's one other point I've got to make, and you said Durham, and that is North Carolina set some standards, and one of them is the School of... And I think it's the School of Math and Science, although it's quite often said the School of Science and Math. But I think it's Math and Science, which is a pioneer in a state-supported private education for exceptional students. And then, of course, you've got the North Carolina School of the Arts, too.
Right.
But North Carolina has been described as, historically, I got to be careful, a progressive state. In that regard,
yeah. Well,
it's
purple.
But you mentioned Durham, so I've got to make mention of the fact that school. All right,
so hands off. Let's get back to hands off. So the way that this all started, it was not my thing. This was a part of different organizations such as Indivisible, the 50-51, which is 50 protests in 50 states in one day. It's a nationwide day of protest. So this is all in response to everything that has been going on since Donald Trump took office. It's just been one thing after another. Musk going in with a sledgehammer and just blowing up all these federal programs without even Doge, without even considering what kind of impact that's going to have on people.
Right.
Which is important to consider, right? So this movement was to just say, get your damn hands off.
Right.
Hands off. Hands off my Social Security. Hands off education for children with disabilities, hands off Medicare, hands off Medicaid. I mean, we could go on and on, but that's it.
One criticism I have, on the issue of Social Security, I don't know where that's coming from.
Well, it's because they're cutting so many positions that it's going to affect us. What the latest thing I heard is that in order to apply for Social Security, you're going to have to go through, was it the Musk's?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that?
I don't know. I've heard this.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they'll do things like that, and then they backtrack. Oh, no, we're not going to do that.
I understand, yeah.
So it's like,
Up and
we're
down.
going to do it. No, we're not. We're going to do it. No, we're not. But anyway, so the thing about Social Security, even if they don't cut anything, they're cutting people who work with people trying to get Social Security. So if you can't find your way to the office of Social Security, which in our case isn't going to be here, we're going to have to travel.
New Bern.
So you're asking people without the means to do so in some way, too old, handicapped, whatever, they're going to have to get over there, and that's just not fair. It's not leveling the playing field for citizens. So anyway, we'll see. But anyway.
That's hands off.
Okay, that is.
Don, your observations on the program.
One point I would like to make, because I think that there's been this rumor that somehow there was financial backing or people were bussed in for various protests around
maybe so. You had folks from Pamlico, Craven, and Onslow County, but I don't know that they were bussed in.
Yeah.
But that was the other aspect of it.
Right. It was a group effort.
This protest, which, by the way, I want to go back to something you and I talked about following it, was how peaceful it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's a premise of these hands-off. It's supposed to be. There's
also a comment you made, which I thought is appropriate as well. But the fact that the protests were conducted at geographical locations, so therefore to attract people into those organizations, into those communities. And, of course, you had Onslow, I mentioned Onslow,
Craven and Pamlico
counties as well.
We met with those people that were organizing there, and we decided to all have one big
location
together, to kind of share the duties of.
So back to your.
So I just wanted to point out, Liz had no budget.
Right.
No one was paid to be there. I was part of a group of people that got together and made posters for it. Those supplies were purchased by us. So there was no outside money. It's
George Soros didn't send you a check.
He did not.
No. And what I would say is what I am observing in our community is there are a number of people that are just looking for an outlet, a way to be heard, to have their opinions heard. I think people feel very frustrated that a lot is going on and no one seems to be able to stop it. And that's why I think whether
it's like a train wreck and nobody's stopping
whether it was 500 or 1,000 people,
regardless.
I have to say I showed up that day and I was amazed that we had that many people come to our small town of Beaufort for a rally.
I want to go back to the number of people and the folks that showed up for that. But that is the question I wanted to ask before we go to the break. What did you hope to accomplish by this protest? I would ask that of anyone doing any event.
I think just to make the whole situation we're in visible to everybody, to make a visible showing of people together on one platform, that we are worried about our country, and also to get media attention, which you gave us, and I appreciate that.
I also think that there's misinformation that gets reported that whatever number you want to throw in there, that people around the country support what the Trump administration is doing, what Musk is doing. I believe that probably more than a majority of the people are very concerned about what's going on in our country. To that point, one of the things that we've experienced with people in the community, there are a number of people that do not want to come forward and speak because they're afraid.
There's a lot of people that would not speak.
Some of them were
like the NOAA, the federal, which I can understand.
But they can't. They by nature of the beast cannot.
Right.
They would be looking at the crowd. was your takeaway? I have a thought, but I'm curious. What was your takeaway of the crowd itself? And you mentioned, Don, that one of the things is folks want to be heard. That this is just out of frustration, right? But looking at that crowd, what was your take? Let me tell you my takeaway.
Okay.
The vast majority were over the age of 40.
Yep.
I'm being kind.
Old white people.
Yes. What about young people? Getting them engaged?
Yes.
And I've asked this of conservatives as well. How do you get younger people engaged in the political discourse? And I think that, quite frankly, a protest is a form of political discourse.
Well, that's one of the things that we are working on in Carteret County. The whole idea about getting minorities as well as young people involved in politics is really going to be a major focus for us. We currently have a few young people by the age of, I'm saying 30, if you want to call that young. It's young. One young man is going to be a part of our protest group, planning group that we're going to start having once a month, and he's going to be there to help give us ideas and hopefully recruit younger people, some of his peers. But yeah, that's an issue. And another thing that I thought about when I looked at the crowd was the lack of minorities. I found out through some people, and I think this is pretty accurate, that the African Americans in our community were very hesitant to come. They were afraid that they might be targeted. They're afraid, and that's too bad. But
Don, your thought?
So I agree with Liz. We're very focused on the question that you've asked. We would like to increase the diversity of our group. When young people do show up, we're
like, hey,
I know.
We seize them.
Freak out.
And in fact, we spoke to a young woman for a position with us this past Friday. It turns out I actually asked her age. I said, you don't have to answer if you don't want. And she was 26.
As long as you weren't hiring her, but you're okay.
26. And she had so much insight on that question.
Right.
So we haven't officially decided to do this, but we're thinking of making her our liaison to young voters.
Right.
To try to...
You're not alone. I mean, conservatives have the same problem. And I say that Republicans, Democrats, libertarians, etc. Well, actually, more young people are gravitating to libertarians. And that's, of course, another issue. You're seeing a growth of unaffiliated.
Right.
And we won't get into that conversation today, but that's an interesting dynamic now in the political scene. The question I have, and we've got about 2 minutes to go, you're looking at future protests. Can we get to, is there a point where the protests will lose their vibrancy? Is there a concern to that?
Not at this point. People are just really energized, and we're going to keep this up as long as we can. It's gonna take a lot of energy. However, not every protest is going to be big.
Okay.
There could be some protests where you just go to the street with signs.
All right.
What I would say is, and people can think that we're blowing things out of proportion, but the president made comments yesterday in the Oval Office about sending what he referred to as homegrowns down to that prison in El Salvador. As an attorney, I've got to say that
You're
is...
like, what? Is that
I'm not sure what constitution he swore an oath to.
To paraphrase an observation that was made by a former press secretary, with Donald Trump, you shouldn't be surprised by his offhanded remarks.
I agree with you, but I guess a concern of mine is...
The president's actually saying that. That's scary. Okay.
But a concern of mine is the House is unwilling to stop him. The Senate is unwilling to stop him. And it appears that the courts are trying, but not entirely successful.
Well,
so at the end of the day, I actually do think it's going to be people on the street that's going to make the difference.
But I will say, related to your issue, your criticism of Congress, that actually goes back almost 15 years. And I'm critical of Congress, and I'm going to pick on with President Obama. But there was also questions of the failure of Congress to act for President Bush. And to your point, I think at times Congress has not stepped up to do its job.
No.
I will agree with you on that. And not just in this particular case, I will say in previous cases as well.
And our representatives here won't even have town halls with us.
Well, right now.
But that's another story.
That's another story.
But it goes on and on, as I've said before.
Liz Becker and Don O'Toole, I want to thank you both for being with me.
Thank you, Lockwood.
Pleasure.
You're amazing.
Well, I tell people
you
that
are.
all the time. No.